1983, excuse me. National Academy of Science, which is left-leaning, found, and I'm quoting, no evidence of a widespread systematic pattern of discrimination in sentencing, end of quote. And much of this comes from an article by John Perazzo, who writes for Front Page magazine, that's put out by the Horowitz Freedom Center. David Horowitz runs it. David is an honorable man. We'll put it up on LarryOda.com. You can take a look at it yourself. 2 years later, 1985, the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology concluded that a disproportionate number of blacks were in prison not because of a double standard of justice, but because they committed a disproportionate amount of crime. Same year, another federal study looked at incarceration rates and said that, quote, even if racism in sentencing exists, it might help explain only a small part of the gap between the 11% black representation in the country and the nearly 50% black representation among persons entering state prisons each year in the United States. 1987, review of the 3 most comprehensive books examining the role of race in the criminal justice system in the journal Criminology concluded that there was little evidence of anti-black discrimination. 4 years later, 1991, you getting bored yet? Rand Corporation found that a defendant's racial or ethnic group affiliation bore little or no relationship to conviction rates. Far more important than race were such factors as the amount of evidence against the defendant and whether or not a credible eyewitness testified. Same year, Rand study also found almost no relationship between a defendant's race or ethnicity and his or her likelihood of receiving a severe sentence. 2 years later, study by the National Academy of Sciences, the same liberal organization, agreed that race had a negligible effect on sentencing, if that. Comprehensive study of federal sentencing guidelines found no evidence of racially disparate treatments. Same year. There was a study of America's 75 largest counties in 1995. Researcher, quote, found no evidence that in the places where blacks in the United States have most of their contacts with the justice system, that the system treats them more harshly than whites. No evidence. I could go on and on. Let me give you one that was just fairly recently. This is a 3-year analysis of the more than 11,000 convicted criminals in the state of California. And the researcher is named Joan Petersilia, and she was one of those who thought that there was a racist criminal justice system. After she went over the research, looked at all the variables, found that the severity of offenders' sentences depended heavily on such factors as prior criminal records, the seriousness of the crimes, where the guns were used in the commission of those crimes. Race was found to have no effect whatsoever. In fact, the researcher was forced to admit that these results contradicted conclusions that she had drawn from an earlier study in which she had not taken prior convictions and the use of firearms into account. In fact, a black person facing a jury is more likely to get an acquittal than a white person. And in places like Washington, D.C., the acquittal rate is pretty substantial because of the suspicion that the criminal justice system is racist.